It's awesome having you in. It's weird. I was going over all the stuff from back in the day and what you were famous for, and from the outside looking in, I remember all of us saying, if smoking weed is the best thing to keep people off of like all of these painkillers and stuff like that, then why is it illegal in the NFL? Do you think, Ricky, that you would have been in the Hall of Fame if it wasn't for getting suspended for using marijuana?
I think I would have had a better chance to get into the Hall of Fame. I look at my career and I ran for over 10,000 yards after retirement and the suspension. So I think I'm on the edge, and maybe without the suspensions I'd be in there.
How many times were you suspended again?
I was only suspended once.
Oh, it was once. Okay, but then
I retired the first time.
That's right.
Yes,
okay.
I retired instead of serving a 4-game Actually, I had a 4-game suspension and I had a year suspension, so twice.
Okay, so when you retired, that's the whole story was. I remember Chris Berman famously saying, "It looks like he chose the weed over playing football."
Were you surprised just how dirty, just what dorks, ill-informed nerds, were in the media, either feigning or being serious about acting what you did was somehow this huge offense to humanity?
That was my question coming in here was, how was it for you guys? Because for so long, it's been a bad thing, but as it's becoming more common, Big Papi has a brand. So how is it for you guys? Because I figured back then it was really the first time people in the media really got to talk about something like that.
A
bit. It was the first time anything like that ever happened.
I've smoked angel dust by accident. It was weed laced with angel dust. It was not a good time. So I've had my own stories. I'm fairly open about it. This is not a traditional show, but it was funny because Berman goes out, right? Berman's not they all have, everyone has smoked weed. He went to Brown. He Ivy League kid. He smoked weed. The phoniness and the hypocrisy of it obviously had to get to you, and it informed your decision.
Well, I was honestly at the time I was too young to appreciate the hypocrisy. I kind of believed that I was doing something horrible.
Yeah.
Until I retired and I started doing my own research, and I realized actually I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm doing something to take care of myself.
Well, the more athletes that we've met and become friends with over the years, the more we're learning. Ted Johnson, he talked to us about how he has used marijuana for pain because it keeps you away from the bad stuff. And
Ted, my guy.
Yeah. He does stuff at the station here all the time. You know Ted?
San Diego.
Nice. Yeah.
Of course.
You got a good Ted Johnson story we could throw in his face?
Please.
I don't have a good story, but just really good guy. And of course, he's from San Diego. Of course, he smokes a little bit.
Did you get high with him back in the day?
Nope, but I'm sure we will one day.
Okay, well, I'm sure you will too. I know
Ted, if you're available, if you're not in the gym.
But
12:30.
when you were going through all of that, did you kind of you obviously saw other people in the NFL who were using it as well, right? And maybe even in strange ways, correct?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, very, very strange. So it was normal for me in the league, but part of the hypocrisy is part of the history of it. Is everyone knows when you're a kid, and my mom would say, if you're gonna do it, hide it. Hide it. That was the story. And all the guys that did it, we did it in the open when we were after practice, but when we were around our coaches and talking about it publicly, we lied because it was illegal and we'd get in trouble.
Did you feel guys were targeted, specific guys with these drug tests?
In college.
Yeah.
In college. Because NFL, the CBA determines when they can test us and how many times they can test us. Okay. But in college, it's a tool used to run guys off.
All right, so that's interesting. I want to get into that. First of all, at Texas, did they care? Did you know you were protected at Texas?
Yeah. I wasn't really smoking that much at Texas.
Okay.
I didn't start smoking until my senior year. And what happens at Texas and most colleges is the coaches will have their own internal drug testing system where they can test you anytime they want. And that's how they use it as a tool to run guys off. The NCAA tests one time a year, but if you fail that test, you're done for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that's changing pretty quickly.
And everyone knew their way around that, though, right?
And so the coaches
Okay.
but the coaches targeted players that they wanted to run off.
Yeah.
Okay, and you saw that
And the
happen?
good and the players that they knew smoked that were the good players didn't get.
Well,
Didn't get drug
obviously,
tested.
yeah. If
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
coaching, where would you play with Mac Brown? If I'm with Mac Brown, if I'm Mac Brown and I have Ricky Williams, I don't care what you're doing. I mean, let's be honest. These guys are not in the business of raising student athletes. These guys are in the business of making millions and millions of dollars. And you saw that while you were in college.
Yes. Well, especially now with NIL deals, it's like
Oh, well, that's insane.
yeah.
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 Well, so you go from there into the NFL, and there was a story that I had read where there was like a Hall of Famer who had taken you aside and told you something about pot, correct?
Well, yeah, and I guess when people hear it, they're kind of blown away. But it's when you're in the NFL, the biggest issue you have to deal with as a player is pain. It's the biggest issue.
Sure.
And so, he was being a big brother, and he was saying you're gonna have to deal with pain. And it was actually the first time anyone introduced me to the concept of medicinal marijuana. I always thought it was something you do to party.
Yeah.
And in that context, there was no partying. It was relaxing and telling me how to take care of my body.
Now, this guy was also smashing up Vicodin and putting it in his his joints as well.
Well, yeah, and again, it sounds crazy when you hear it, but in the NFL, they're giving us the Vicodin all the time.
Yeah, so you know what, Scott Zolak has kind of talked about that before.
Yeah.
Is that the accessibility back in the day? I think it's changed obviously a little bit, but I mean, was it just as free flowing as we heard?
Yes, but I mean, my experience in New Orleans, it was more free flowing because there's vets and there's guys coming in and they're saying they're in pain. What is the trainer going to do? Say no?
Right. Yeah.
I got to Miami. KO, our trainer, was a little bit more judicious about how he handed it out. On the plane after a game, he was handing it out for you.
It was like Mike and Ike's.
Yes, but on a daily basis, you had to have something really going on.
So on the plane, you never would have any anxiety. They would make sure that you were
exactly
that you were.
Well,
you were
it was
pulled
mainly
out.
because after the game, everyone was
Yes.
going to be in a lot of pain, and so they wanted to just get ahead of it.
You can smoke Vicodin. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. Until he did that.
Until he did that.
So what did people around you say after that whole, the Chris Berman thing? You chose we are. I mean, was there anybody around you, like an agent, people who were invested in you making money, who were like, what are you doing?
I mean, most people close to me know that I'm kind of different, and they were a little bit shocked, but not too shocked.
Yeah.
And my agent at the time, Lee Steinberg, was great about it.
Really?
He said,
Well,
"I
he said his own stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So he could relate. He said,
Right.
listen, he said, just don't burn any bridges. He said, I understand if you want to do what you want to do, just watch what you say and don't burn any bridges because you might change your mind.
Great advice.
It was great advice.
And you got back in.
And I got back in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is it one of those things now where you found out who your friends were?
I knew who my friends were. I found new friends. And I think that was the most important thing. I mean, my whole life I'd been defined just by being a football player. And I didn't know that I could do anything else. And so I remember when I picked up the phone to call the NFL to tell them I was going to retire, like my whole life flashed in front of me. And it was like all these different moments, all of them attached to football. And I was giving all that up. And as soon as I did it, I felt this huge relief.
Yeah.
And I got a chance to travel around the world and get to know myself better.
How much were you smoking at that time?
Not very much. I was in the drug program, and so I was being tested 10 times a month. And so
10 times a month.
Man.
Wow.
almost every other day. So, sometimes the pain would get so bad, and I didn't love taking pills that I would just take a hit or two.
Yeah.
And what really got me was we played Philly. I think it was Monday night, and I had a separated shoulder. And in that game, I reseparated my shoulder, and we ended up getting knocked out of the playoffs. And that night, instead of drinking, I smoked a little bit too much, and
Yeah.
I failed a test the next day.
Oh man, but that's something like how rampant? What not rampant? How many people? Like what percentage of players? Because it almost seems like a ton of people were doing it at the time, and they just weren't talking about it.
There was a lot, and it's I think you can divide it up by there's some players that are more risk averse,
Yeah.
and some players that are more rule followers. The rule followers didn't smoke. The more risk averse people who were more aware, they did. So I would say when I played, probably 35 to 40%, depending on the team. I'd say now it's probably over 50%.
Oh my God, it's got to be like
Oh, it's-
90%.
yeah,
I was going to say the
now.
same.
Draymond
Because
Green.
like, at this point, it's like, why wouldn't you?
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
Draymond Green had a blunt, and it was blunts. He had a blunt roller at his wedding. So
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I mean, Kevin Durant. I mean, he's done straight up interviews
Well,
while
he's,
smoking
he's,
weed.
yeah, he's talked about it.
Yeah.
He
So
spends
yeah.
most of his time indoors, Kevin Durant.
Well, I mean, he is kind of. I don't want to say strange, but that's the lifestyle he's chosen.
But
He
that's
likes
just
to be
it.
with-
It's that.
Yeah,
It's that in video games on off nights. For
When
him.
I say 50%, I mean 50% of people that smoke on a daily basis.
Oh,
Okay,
all right.
daily. Okay,
All right. So you, when you get the chance as a young man to travel the world, where are you going? What are you doing? I mean, that's such a rare experience for someone that young.
It was, especially because I had money. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
And for since I was 13, until I was 27, every fall was doing the same thing.
Regimented.
Yeah, exactly. And so just having like off time in that time of the year was it was weird.
Where'd you go?
I went to Australia. I went to Fiji. I went to India.
By yourself? Did you bring friends or?
I went with a friend to Fiji. I went by myself to Australia. I was there for about 2.5 months, and I went to India to study yoga. And so I went with my yoga teacher.
Are those all weed friendly countries that you were in?
No, but the strange thing is when I was traveling and people had no idea who I was, but somehow I don't know if it was the way I looked, but in all of the countries, people approached me and offered me weed.
Oh,
Even
really?
in India, it was more of a spiritual context in India, but it was still. We were driving up the Himalayas going to the yoga retreat, and I look out the window, and there's just miles and miles of cannabis growing wild.
Wow.
And it was like a wake up call for this thing that we call a drug, but you come here and it's like literally growing like a weed.
I still couldn't do that. That's the one thing is that now that it's legalized, I feel no problem, smoking or getting edibles, things like that. But just some random person in a country I've never been to before,
Well, that's how you
offering
get
it to me.
That's how you smoke angel dust.
Yeah. Like, have you had an experience like that that's backfired?
I have with alcohol, but not with
Oh, you've been-
not with cannabis.
Oh, you've been like somebody put something in your drink?
yeah.
What was that?
Like a roofie or like
Yeah, what
acid?
happened?
It was a roofie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was that situation?
So I was in Australia, and I was at the beach, and this guy came up to me, and we just started talking. He was a friendly guy, and and I'm like, sometimes I'm too friendly, And so the guy was being nice, and I was like, yeah. He was like, hey, I want to show you, where I grew up, and I was like, sure, and so we get in the car, and he's like, you want a drink? And I'm like, sure, So he pulls over, and he gets his big old like cup, and he fills it full of ice, and he puts like Irish whiskey, and a little bit of Coke, right? And I'm sipping it, and next thing I know, he's like, hey, I want to show you this fishing spot, and we're on this deck, and I'm sitting there. Next thing I know, I get really sleepy, and then I wake up, and I literally wake up, and it's dark, and I hear mosquitoes, and I'm like,
Whoa.
Checking your wallet?
Yeah.
it was still there. I had to take a cab back to my hotel.
What was the deal? I mean,
He just left you?
You were
He
still
just left me.
clothed?
Yeah, I was still clothed.
All right.
No, I wasn't sore. I wasn't sore anywhere. I was still clothed.
Gonna say.
Well, no, I'm just wondering why
let's,
spend the time to knock somebody out? What he just gets off
Yeah,
on leaving
John.
you in a remote
Maybe
spot?
John's like, why not?
Yeah,
He
chicken
gonna
man,
take your
come on.
clothes off?
Maybe he chickened out, or there were people walking by. I don't know.
maybe.
That is strange, but it's so it's a spiritual journey, and so you go on this retreat to so it's basically like you had a lot of money, and it's like almost like a gap year for people. Like you take this, you take this, you have this spiritual journey, and it's strange, but and so after that you feel like now I'm ready to get back into football. Now it's more on my terms.
Exactly.
And I know who I am as a person.
That's
now.
It's exactly what it was. And the biggest difference was I had no idea before, but coming back, I had a sense of where I was headed, and thinking about how can I use this platform to do the things that are important to me. How can playing in the NFL support me?
I remember when you came back, the talk was, well, how can anyone who's been smoking weed 24/7 for an entire year be in anywhere near football shape when he gets back? But that obviously a massive misconception about how people who use marijuana, can't be physically fit.
Yeah, actually, it's quite the inverse. So I told you I started studying yoga, and one of the things I found is yoga and cannabis go extremely well together because it increases your kinesthetic awareness, and so you can feel where you're tight a little bit more, and you can breathe into it and release it. And so I found when I came back after learning yoga and using cannabis that I stayed healthier.
Okay. Now, did your when you started smoking as much as you did? I was reading about how you started getting into astrology and things like that. Was there any like type of music that you weren't into that all of a sudden you understood?
Well, it was the opposite. So I grew up a huge Bob Marley fan.
Yeah.
Huge, even before I smoked. And so I think when I started smoking more, I understood his music even more.
Okay. All right. You still don't like the Grateful Dead? Please tell me you don't like the Grateful Dead.
I started playing that game Guitar Hero.
Yeah,
A couple Grateful Dead songs, and I kind of got into them a little bit.
Okay, good. As long as you stop there,
Yeah.
a Guitar Hero, you're good.
It's just when you're tuning up is what they use. All right. So explain the Highsman's strain.
So we're a lifestyle brand. And it's really about me getting out and telling my story and providing quality cannabis, obviously. I think the biggest reason I started this brand was because, back in the early 2000s when I was going through what I was going through, nobody was talking about cannabis in an uplifting and positive way.
Yeah.
I had to go out and find that information for myself.
What kind of strain do you prefer? Like, you found all this stuff. Are you more of like an indica or a sativa, or is it everything?
It's everything. It depends. And this is what I'm part of what the message is our tagline is spark greatness, and we're talking about after you consume, what are you doing, right? And people are all different. Some people like to be active. Some people, like for me, when I consume, I love to read. It helps me like get a different perspective on certain content. And part of the conversation is because where we come from, it's just a bad thing that you're not supposed to do that people are doing anyway. And so when you're hiding something, you're not really thinking of how it can be used in a positive way. So I'm trying to have that conversation so people can start to say, oh, I didn't know that I could use cannabis for this. I didn't know that I could use it for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now, are you obviously you get to test out all the strains and everything. So, like, what's the testing? What is that like?
Have you become like a chemist,
like a sommelier?
It is more. It's exactly like a sommelier.
Yeah.
So there's two parts. One are the genetics, and it's like people, right? Someone comes from good stock, right? they have potential, but if they're not treated well when they're raised, that potential is wasted. And so, as a lifestyle brand, most brands in cannabis are cultivators. So they grow the cannabis and then they try to sell it to you. And unfortunately, they need to make a profit. And so most companies are more profit heavy.
Sure.
But when I come in, I get to be quality heavy, and I get to go in and see what are you growing that does well in your environment, and how are you taking care of the cannabis once it's grown. And you can tell it. You can tell by the smell, by the flavor, by the texture of it. And so I have this long like application that I go through when I test the flower. It takes me about 45 minutes to really look at, are they doing a good job growing this, and are they treating it well after? Because it's important to preserve the quality for the end consumer.
Can you like open up the High Times like centerfold and like Bud of the Month and go like, oh,
I can't
like identify everything?
I'm telling you.
I've always been amazed by that when people Bud of the Month, man.
It's like,
check
how
it
do you
out.
know?
I travel
Look
with
at it, purple,
the
man.
jewelry loop, because when I'm testing flower,
Really?
I'm
You're
really,
like a monocle.
because the juice is in the trichome heads, and if someone hasn't treated the cannabis well, the trichome heads are gone, so there's not going to be anything there.
Can you tell instantly whether it's rat weed, or he's just like, this is something that's going to be garbage?
Usually, you can tell by the smell. And I was talking to someone the other day who came from the wine industry and now is in cannabis.
Yeah.
And I said, what is the overlap? And without skipping a beat, he said the nose. He said, if your nose likes it, your body's going to like it.
Okay.
And it's true. And that's really the training, is if you smell something, right? Because that's the point of our olfactory nerve, right?
Yeah.
To tell us if something is good for us or not.
Yeah.
So in cannabis, that's what people love about it, is the smell. And when you really understand the plant, it's amazing. This plant produces over 500 different volatile chemicals. So it can produce such a wide variety of smells.
And if you could make weed like it was in 1989, I would be very happy. So it does. I don't flip out every time. The weed is much different.
What can he
now.
do to not get paranoid?
Yeah,
Because that's his problem.
Honestly, I think it's really like find something organic.
Yeah.
Find something organic
Because-
that's actually grown in soil.
Because when I was in high school or in college, I could smoke weed, and then I went and then like for some reason, like 5 years later, everything like everything hydroponic and everything.
Yeah, yep.
Like everything was just like, how do you do, Fred? And I'm like, the time's not moving.
Yeah.
So
You get the chemist involved, and they're gonna crank it up.
yes, they're gonna crank it up.
go.
But I have good. I hear good things about Highsman's, and